Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Debate Hub. I've got Jordan with me here from Reasons to Doubt, and we're going to talk about voter ID. Specifically, voter ID in America, because America's in a weird spot. In the year of our Lord 2025, America is certainly in a position. But before we get too far into this, Jordan, how are you? Who are you? What are you doing here?
Uh, let's see. In order, I'm doing well.
Good.
I am Jordan. I am an American. Unwillingly, I wasn't given a choice, but I do live here. And what I do in the internet is I run Reason to Doubt. You can see my logo behind my head. Channel on skepticism and stuff. I'm also a nuclear engineer. I think we're going to talk about that later this month. And then what I'm doing
Yes.
here is talking about voter ID laws and how uh, they're probably bad. They're usually bad.
So what we're going to do is we're going to be doing a chat about this. The chat's going to last between 30 minutes and 45 minutes. Then we're going to take a quick little, there's going to be like a little blurb that's going to happen. Make sure you get your questions in if you have any that are for Jordan or me, just about the topic at hand. And then we are going to cut that. We'll go into a quick 15-minute Q&A, and then we will be out of here. So make sure you get your questions ready if you have any. And let's get started. So the reason this conversation sort of came about is because I think both of us commented on Alex O'Connor, Cosmic Skeptic, having Destiny on, talking about voter ID. Now, they did a longer conversation that was kind of just about sort of the interaction of politics in America. Like, what's going on? Who's doing what? Why are people doing things the way they are? What is a debate, bro? It was kind of part of the conversation. I think he called Elon Musk a traitor, which, I mean, you know.
I That would be questionable only in that you have to be loyal first to be a traitor, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Uh so
Well, yeah, it's not like he was born an American, right? So it's as
right.
somebody who immigrated in and then disrupted the country.
He's the immigrant all the MAGAs are talking about.
Yeah,
He's the bad one.
it's him. It was him the whole time. um, yeah, so I'm gonna play the clip for you. I've got the clip set up at about 1 minute and 20 seconds, and I think you wanted to listen to like about a minute of it.
Mhm.
All right, so I'm gonna play that for us, and so we can kind of get an idea of what it was. This was on Twitter. The top of it, this was posted by Alex, so just for context, and it says, "As an outsider from the UK listening to Elon Musk struggle to understand why voter ID is so controversial and why it isn't mandatory to present ID when voting. Destiny doesn't see it as a problem. Am I missing something?" So I'm gonna hit play, and we'll see how this goes.
I think if you wanted to have like a national voter ID and you wanted to have it that it was automatically issued to every citizen of the United States that could, prove they had an address there and you wanted to require that to vote, I don't think that should be a huge problem. I think most people should be okay with that. But
Do you think that voters should be required to show some form of identification before they can vote?
I mean, right now it seems like I don't think there's ever been like any substantial fraud uncovered as a result of how we run our elections right now. So I don't feel strongly about it. But I think if somebody wants to do it and they want to provide for a way to get that ID for free, I think it's okay to do it.
Yeah, because I mean, the problem to me when I hear people say like, well, what about people who struggle to get IDs? I mean, free government IDs for everyone. I mean, to me, it just seems really strange to me that there are, I mean, especially if it's true that California did indeed just pass a law that actually prohibits this. Like, forgetting that for a moment, for it not to be a requirement to show ID, I can't imagine just like walking into a booth and just saying, "Yep, I'm here," and being
Well,
able to vote in a federal election.
generally you walk in and then you verify your name and your address, and then if you're registered at that address with that name, then that's how you vote.
If you're registered at that address.
Yeah, so I would go in and I would say my name is XYZ, and then they go okay, and then you say my address is this,
And
and
how
then
do
they
they
would
check whether you're telling the truth about
you
where you
just say,
live?
well, you just say it,
You just say it, right?
Yeah.
And like that just
and then
seems
they say
like
if you voted yet.
way too easy a thing to do with something as important as a federal election.
Sure.
Especially even if you're not actually worried about voter fraud, which I think we should be.
Mhm.
We should be concerned about all
Important
things that can
points.
happen in an election.
So what Destiny was saying right before that clip started, and we don't need to play it, but it was basically outlining some of the bad ways in which voter ID has been used in the past, right? Um, And I think one of the interesting things to me was how Alex just kind of skates past all of those bad things, you know? Um, you're muted, by the way.
Sorry, I just said yes. I was just
Yeah.
acknowledging that I understood
Yeah.
what you were saying.
So, I think Destiny really nails it on the head here. And it seems like there's a fundamental disconnect between the conversation that most people on the left are having when they talk about voter ID and the people on the right are having. They seem to be talking about two completely different things, because when someone on the right talks, they bring up the points that Alex brought up, which is, well, shouldn't you have to prove who you are? Aren't we worried about the integrity of our elections? And what the people on the left tend to talk about is, shouldn't we be focusing on making sure people can vote, right? Isn't that the goal, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that there's having a conversation. One of the things that that Alex said that I think I fundamentally probably disagree with is he said that isn't that too easy? And I'm like, I think it should be easy to vote. I think voting should be easy. It should be accessible. Like, I don't see a problem with that. So if you were to do like Destiny suggested and say, well, we're going to provide you with a free government issued ID, then you're good to go and you just show up with your free government issued ID, I think that's fine. But the problem is with like voter ID isn't just a conversation about voter ID, it's about voter restrictions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that seems to be more of a bigger issue, where you've got specific parties in America that are specifically targeting certain demographics and trying to go out of their way to make it more difficult to vote.
Right. So if you look at how so the past is a good predictor of the future, right? If you want to know how something is going to happen, that we've tried in the past, you can look at the past to kind of see what you should do in the future. Yeah. And if we look at the past of voter ID and similar laws in America, they have been used almost entirely in order to stop certain people, typically brown people, from voting. And
typically brown people.
Usually brown people, often poor people, but because of historic racism in America, those two groups have a lot of overlap. And so what happens a lot of times is you'll have something like Alex talks about, how it should just be fair. It applies to everybody. You can have these kind of policies that technically apply to everyone. Like, there's nothing in the law that says if you're black, you can't vote, right? Because that would be illegal. But they'll write it in such a way that it will make it hard for them to vote. And to see how this policy would work in a more way that's, I think, a bit more intuitive, there are very similar policies that exist frequently in America when it comes to clothing or dress codes in schools. So you can have a dress code, and it applies to everyone equally. Everyone has to follow the dress code, and it'll say things like you can't wear pants that are below a certain place on your hips, or you can't wear braids beyond a certain length or something. And if you just read it, there's nothing in there that says you can't dress a certain way because you're black. However, if you take the broader cultural context into account, they're specifically targeting all of the ways in which people of that culture tend to act and dress, and the kind of hairstyles they tend to use. Right, exactly. Yeah. And so while it technically isn't targeted, like, it is functionally targeted. Right.
Yeah, it's, I think, something that came up in this overall discussion, which, by the way, is linked down in the description below. So if you do want to see the entire conversation between Alex and Destiny, which I unfortunately paused this on a face that makes it look like Alex is picking his nose, and I'm really sorry. He's not. He's just scratching it, but it's kind of funny. The greater conversation kind of comes into play that it's, if you're not, like, what is the conversation you're actually having? And how does it affect, how does it deal with, like, real life effects, as opposed to, like, the keyboard warrior, like, the debate bros, what are we talking about? You're having a conversation with your family. Okay, great. What are we talking about? Are we talking about how voting is unfairly targeted in specific ways by putting in additional rules that are superfluous rules? You'll notice one of the things that Destiny said in that clip was, you verify that this is you and where you live.
I can tell you how it works in my county when I vote. Yeah. I go to my voting place. I have to show my ID. I have to show, like, my driver's license.
Yep.
They confirm. I tell them what my address is, what my name is, and they compare what's on my license and what I said to what's on the voter registration. If that information doesn't match, then I'm expected to provide some kind of documentation, like if I've moved, I have to like give a current utility bill or something.
Yep.
If all of that fails, I'm allowed to cast what's called a provisional ballot. It's a ballot that's put in a special pile, and that pile is like checked with more scrutiny later to make sure that I am in fact who I said I am. So that way I have the opportunity to vote. But and so in my place, we do have voter ID, and that's not uncommon in America, but it's not federally mandated, which is what they're talking about.
Yeah, and it's also like, again, there are verification processes that don't necessarily rely on a quote-unquote voter ID. Right? You can use different kinds of identification, like you said, for example, a utility bill, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, but what you can run into problems there too, because what kind of IDs do you choose? It's very easy to pick the kind of IDs that white people will tend to have, and not
like
the kind
a driver's
of IDs
license. Yeah,
that brown people will tend to have, right?
Well, there's
so
also additional repercussions to that. If you force everybody, if they want to vote, to have a driver's license, you're actually feeding into the automotive industry in a really weird way.
You're also forcing people to take time out of their day to go to the DMV and spend the money it takes. It's not free to get a driver's license, so it's de facto a poll tax. But I think, kind of zooming out, if we're looking at this voter ID as like we're going to solve a problem, or some kind of problem we should solve, the first thing you want to do is define what your problem is. What is the problem we're trying to solve? And it seems to me the only sensible place to start is to say we want to have elections that are secure and elections where as many people who wish to vote can vote.
Yeah, and the question is there even a problem to begin with? Because a lot of the questions around like whether or not like fraudulent elections, fake election votes is coming from bullshit propaganda pieces by Dinesh D'Souza, who should probably be arrested for that.
So yeah, like any solution you pick is going to have drawbacks. Like if you require any verification whatsoever, there's going to be some number of people, no matter how small, that don't clear that level, right?
Yes.
Now, we may as a society decide that it's acceptable to have some number, right? Because the cost and benefit works, right?
For an example, having an address. Not everybody has an address. So
exactly. So there could be people who are unhoused who should be able to vote, but will have a very difficult time voting. We as a society, that's something we'd have to decide. But we should like clearly understand what we're getting for the people we're disenfranchising, right?
Yeah.
And so to your point, what we're getting currently is basically nothing, because there is no data whatsoever that supports widespread fraud with American elections. Well, specifically widespread in-person impersonation fraud, which is the only kind of fraud that this would help with, right?
Right.
It wouldn't help with an absentee ballot. It wouldn't help with any kind of mail-in or anything. This would only help with somebody who physically goes to a polling place, claims to be someone they are not, and then votes.
Yeah.
And this is lots of people have studied this. It's been studied many times. One of the people who studied it was the Brennan Law Center, but like many different studies have been done, and the rate of fraud is somewhere between 0.0003% and 0.0025%. Basically nothing, right? So that's at most. If it solved every single one of these things, and and our estimates are an order of magnitude off.
Yeah.
You're preventing 0.003% of fraud.
As opposed to potentially preventing an entire subsection of your country from not being able to vote due to X, Y, and Z. Because of whatever solution you put forward to this problem that does not appear to even exist. People feel like there's a problem, but is there a problem? Or is the problem that people feel this way?
And it might seem counterintuitive, perhaps. You might think that this should be a bigger problem because elections are very serious. But if you actually like think about it for a second,
You elected
imagine
Donald Trump. You are very unserious people.
there's a large portion of our population who's deeply unserious. Yes,
I'm
but
sorry, go on. That was mean.
I'm not going to get sidetracked on that right now. First of all, committing fraud in an election is a very serious crime. It's felony,
Yes.
and you can go to jail for 10 years if you commit fraud. One count. If you do the thing we're talking about one time, you can go to jail for a decade, right? They do not mess around with that if you're found. And this is a crime that's almost unique because by its very nature, it leaves a bunch of witnesses and a paper trail every time you do it. It's the worst crime. And
it is a
in
bad
exchange,
crime for almost nothing in return.
and in exchange, you get one vote. One. Now,
Seems not really
and
worth it.
and in order to do this, you need to know who it is you're impersonating. You need to know their address. You need to know their voting place. Like,
Yep.
you have to know some information. So if you wanted to do it multiple times, you'd have to gather this information from multiple people, go to different polling places.
And beat them
like,
there.
Yeah, right. And if they vote, and you have to be confident they're not going to vote, because if they vote and they can prove who they are, then that's just going to throw up a red flag for who the hell you were. Like,
Right.
it's a stupid crime. Like, if you're going to
It's
if you're going to
dumb.
influence an election, there's way better ways to do it. This is the worst way.
Yeah, you buy
right?
Twitter.
Yeah, exactly. But that's only one part of the equation, right? So like
Right.
the benefit we get is an extremely, extremely small, virtually non-existent benefit. But hey, what's the cost? Maybe if it costs us nothing, hey, maybe it's worth it, right? Maybe
Sure.
whatever, right? Unfortunately, it doesn't cost us nothing, right?
Mhm.
Because and I can't. I've had this discussion with a lot of people,
Mhm.
and it seems it's crazy how hard it is for them to comprehend the idea that someone might have a different life than they do. You know, like for someone in my income band in my area that I live in, the idea of not having a driver's license is crazy because everybody has. How could you even live without a driver's license? You have to drive, you have to go to work, you have to buy whatever, right? But and I don't know why this is so hard to comprehend. Not everyone lives that way. Like some
I
people
do not have a driver's license.
right. Some people live in cities that have like functioning public transit and they just don't need a driver's license.
Go figure.
You know?
It's almost like that's a direction people should want to go in.
Right, exactly. So there's data on this. The Brennan
Mhm.
Brennan Center was one survey I found. They found that roughly 7% of Americans don't have ready access to the documentation needed to get a state issued picture ID.
Right.
And that number is 12% for low income Americans.
So we've
almost
jumped
one in
from a
8.
problem that has a 0.03% existence across all of America to people and sacrificing, did you say 12% minimum
12% of low income Americans, yes.
of low income? So we're going to sacrifice 12% for the 0.03 that might be happening maybe.
Right. If you look at the people who have, whether they have a photo ID, it is in some cases as high as 20% of people who are Black may not have a photo ID, depending on where they live in the country. So, like,
Right.
this is not a small number of people that you're disenfranchising. This is a huge block of people.
Yeah, 20% of the American population is very, very large. So you have to understand
Yeah.
that 12% isn't like 50 people.
Exactly.
12% is like hundreds of thousands of people.
Right. And so this is the cost that you're paying. You're paying in order to get 0.0003% less fraud, you're removing the right to vote from something like 10 to 15% of Americans.
And it's not even just like normal fraud. It's like this is fraud that's easily traceable, has a paper trail, you're easily caught doing it. The punishment for it is incredibly high that it's almost worth nothing to
Right.
do.
The kind of fraud that even if it was done is very unlikely to go unnoticed by its
and is very
nature.
unlikely to even get you much of anything.
Exactly. So clearly that's way imbalanced. Now,
Right.
often the answer I hear when I say this is, well, if they care about voting that much, they should go do it. Well, now we're not talking about voter security, though. See, now you're saying it's not about voting. It's about making sure that only people who care enough get to vote.
Right.
But I don't know, maybe you know more about the American Constitution than I do, but I don't remember anything in there about the right to vote being tied to having enough money or caring enough about it, right? Like that
Easy
wasn't
access, yeah.
that wasn't a requirement of voting. In fact, we had a whole thing about this. They used to, when Black people were first allowed to vote, people in the South tried to stop them from voting by doing things like poll taxes, by making it cost money, enough money that it was difficult for someone who's extremely poor, but easy for someone who is wealthy, or literacy tests, literacy tests that were geared towards excluding people who are Black or brown, who were recently slaves and not educated, from being allowed to vote. It's funny because if you've ever heard the term grandfather clause, like someone was grandfathered in, that comes from the racist South. You're welcome, because turns out a lot of white people are also illiterate, but we can't have them not voting. So what they said was, oh, well, if your grandfather could vote, you don't need to prove you're literate. You're grandfathered in. That's where it comes from.
We're not allowed saying that anymore. God damn it.
Right. So yeah, if you take that line of kind of like what Alex was saying in there, like, surely it shouldn't be that hard. Surely it shouldn't be that hard. Well, I'm telling you, it clearly is that hard. But even if you can't comprehend that, why are we making it hard? Like, now
why would we use your reasoning? Why would we use your bar? Why is your life the standard life that should be the expected thing to go?
Exactly.
And if you want to do that, then okay, but right? Because it's just like, all right, so say we want to have a minimum expectation of every American should be at this line. All right, well, that means we have a bunch of Americans that aren't, that we need to bring to that line if we want to make that line the barrier to entry.
Basically, if you want to do that, if you want to make it so that there is this barrier to entry, then you need to do that and not pretend it's about voter security, because it's not.
Oh, yeah, because it's just about being racist.
Exactly. But Destiny gave the answer, which, if they actually cared about voter security, if that was really what they cared about, and it was that important, then what we should do, if this is something we as a culture want to value, then the way we can do this in a less problematic way is to make it not just free, not just easy, but on the government to get you this ID. Like, there are departments charged to hunting you down and putting this ID in your hand.
Yes.
For free. Right?
Yeah.
It is the government's job.
Which would cost money.
Cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
But hey, if you want to do it in a way that will not disenfranchise people, but still make the elections 0.003% more secure, then we can choose as a nation to spend that money. But for some reason,
to complain that, well, if you cared that much, well, if they cared that much, they would vote. Well, if you cared that much, you would make it accessible in these ways.
Exactly. Right. So when you actually drill down to to what their argument is, they're saying, I find it distasteful that someone who has a life who's different than mine is able to vote easily. That's what the argument ultimately comes to. That's the functional equivalent of their argument. Like, you're muted.
Oh, I pressed my button backward. Which is silly, because America is massive. Like, America is not a small place. Like, where and what is going on in America is greatly different from the west to the east coast, from the south to the north, even within some states alone. Right? There's a big difference between, like, rural California, for example, and California city proper.
And that's this is a little bit of a tangent, but this is another reason why voter fraud is basically non-existent in America, is because our system is totally decentralized. We don't have one voting system. We have 10 million voting systems. We have like one for every county.
So you can't rip off like one county and go to another county and try to fake votes. You have different rules in every single one of them. And like, good luck figuring it out.
There are some federal rules, but it's mostly left up to the states, and the states delegate a lot to the county. So yeah, what works even in one county may not work 20 miles down the road.
Oh God.
it is a profoundly dumb system that I don't think we should have. But one advantage it does yield is that it's very hard to.
It's too stupid to fake.
Exactly.
What is the saying that nothing is foolproof to a sufficiently talented fool, and just
Exactly.
nobody's foolish enough to figure it out?
This system is just too
Stupid
dumb
proof.
to break. Yeah. Exactly.
It's too insane. Sorry, don't mind me if you see me futzing around. My dog has decided now is the time that he wants to play with me. I played with you all day.
So, yeah, I think that when you drill down into it, even
Yeah.
though the words they're saying sound reasonable,
Sure.
if they actually have to account for the practical impact that those policies would have, which you have to do if you're going to be making policy.
The cost,
right?
the real life effect it has on people's day-to-day life, what it actually ends up doing economically speaking, because if you do something like making sure everybody has to have a driver's license, that starts affecting a lot of different things in like a domino
Right.
effect.
Yeah. So it's not enough to make rules and policies that work for you personally, or for white Americans, or for Americans of a certain affluence. If we're going to have a society that is actually pluralistic, then we need to have policies that work for as many Americans as possible.
Yeah, I don't
With-
like people will bring up, for example, like, hey, shouldn't you have a certain level of political understanding, like a literacy test, to be allowed and to be able to vote? And the answer to that is, in an ideal society where everybody has access to education and access to all of these things that would enable them to the baseline American intelligence being above 100, yes, that would be great. But we don't live in that kind of a society. Not only
Yeah.
do we live in a society where there's way too much, like, the amount of illiteracy in America is too damn high. Like, wait, you have a famous lady who everyone thinks is the second coming of Jesus because she used her money to make a reading program, and it's successful.
Yeah. The number of functionally illiterate Americans is bonkers. But there's a really, really interesting paper that I read called The Right to a Competent Electorate. And it was a very interesting argument where he was basically arguing that universal suffrage is intrinsically unjust because it gives power to someone who is not competent to wield that power.
Sure.
And it's not something we allow in any other situation. But what I really liked about this paper was after it made this very interesting argument, at the end it said this was all academic because in the real world, this is unjust, but it's more just than all of the other alternatives. Because who gets to make those rules? Humans historically are really bad at that, like
Yeah. Immediately has to take this argument and say, hey, listen, this makes sense on paper, but as soon as you try to apply it, it's going to collapse instantaneously. Right. And yeah, you know what? Listen, if you're smart and you've got money and you've had a decent life and you think that it's unfair that you have to follow a rule that has catered to, like, for example, if you're a liberal and now you're dealing with all the MAGA idiots, that's going to feel unfair. And I get that. But part of that responsibility is on you and your government to educate people, to learn, to spend your time doing the annoying conversation that no one wants to have.
I think I would love to live in a world where we could have these kind of tests, but in America, you can basically guarantee that anything like that will be used for racist purposes.
Oh,
you can just guarantee it.
100%.
Right? If you use an IQ tests are famously flawed because they cater to culture more than intelligence. So you can't use that. If there are literacy tests, it would be based on a certain cultural frame of reference. Like basically no matter what metric you picked, there would be a way to make it racist. And if it can be racist, rest assured, America will find it.
If it can be racist, it will be racist, and it'll have that Star-Spangled Banner playing in the background.
Yes,
I have this argument that I like to put forward to Americans where I say your freedom only counts when you actually acknowledge what a bald eagle sounds like. Otherwise, all of your freedom is based off of bullshit.
I prefer our red-tailed hawk bald eagle, and I think actually that we probably currently have the technology to fix this. We could genetically modify and create an eagle that sounds correct.
It sounds correct. The eagle has to change to sound correct. Noted. There's something to be said. How about this instead then? If the issue is that you want more security instead, and you want better quality voters, because that sounds like what people want. They want their voters to be more qualified
Which,
to
hey,
make decisions.
I'd like that too. Then maybe we wouldn't have a fascist in office.
Right? Okay, so then if that's the problem, like low quality, the problem is low quality voters, right? You have to then identify what is making people low qualified in your opinion, and then you have to justify that opinion, because you can't just say they're brown. That's just racist.
Right. Yeah.
So if the qualifier is you think that there's too many low quality voters, then you say, okay, well, how do we make high quality voters? Do we make them by giving people more time in their day-to-day life so that way they have time to educate themselves? Do you make education more accessible? Do you educate politics at a younger age in school? Do you make a federal rule for your primary schools? Like, what's the way to go about that?
I don't know. I mean, we could start by having an education system that's functional. Better, more educated populace would probably be good. You could perhaps, other democracies have tried mandatory voting, which might get people more engaged. If I think, honestly, this might be a hot take. Sorry, I'm smacking your face. This might be a hot take. There. I suspect that if people felt like their votes mattered more because we didn't have a government that was dominated by the electoral
college.
Well, not just the electoral college, but like the wealthy elite dominate the political spectrum. Like right. There's an argument to be made that America is functionally an oligarchy, not because a lot of things that are very important to everyday Americans don't happen because the people with wealth don't want it to happen. Right. So if you fixed that, so people believe that their votes would actually enact change, I suspect you'd have a more engaged electorate.
Yeah, I even think that even the gap between like the poorest person and the richest person in your country, shrinking that gap down, I think would help, because it takes a lot of stress off. It makes people more equal across the board, which means they have the time and the space to think about what they want.
That's a great point. I actually forget everything I said. Universal basic income, that would fix it. Because if you don't have to worry about starving to death if you don't go to work today, then maybe you can have time to like research your vote and like be politically engaged, I
also have an idea that I think that people who are more educated in a little bit of a different way than the way, because I think this applies to Canada as well, not just America, is that if we educate people a little bit differently than we do now, we can help people learn how to engage in politics better than the way they're currently engaging in politics. If I talk to somebody who is like the age of my parent, they are really, really bad at engaging in conversation on an intellectual or on a what's the word I'm looking for? Honest level. Like they get dishonest really, really fast because they get accusatory and defensive really, really, really fast. And I don't think they're doing it intentionally. But I find in real life, even if it's not my conversation, if I'm sitting at the bar and I'm listening to somebody across the bar because I'm nosy and I'm being a bitch and I want to know what they're fucking talking about, and I'm people watching, and I hear a conversation going on, and it's a younger person talking to an older person, if they start talking about politics, that older person goes off the handle so fast.
So fast. Yeah. So I think what we've learned, what we've come to is eat the rich and get rid of all the old people. That would solve this problem.
Something like that. I saw somebody make a really funny comment about Trump wanting to annex Greenland. And they were like, wait until all the MAGA idiots find out that Greenland is almost all indigenous people and not a bunch of Scandinavian white blonde women. I thought that was funny. But
Yeah,
it's
I
tricky.
suspect the response would be that these immigrants need to leave. That would be their response.
This is our land. Get out of here, immigrants.
Yeah.
That's one thing that I've heard a lot of too when it comes to we're worried that immigrants are going to vote. Or like the Democrats are bringing immigrants in so the immigrants will vote Democratic. And it's like, what?
Well, I mean, no, because of all the reasons we already discussed, but also no, because it's not guaranteed that just because you immigrated, you would vote left. Like, for a lot of reasons.
Yeah,
you know.
one of the major reasons is like a lot of people who are when you say immigrant, who are you talking about? Because that's the first really big question you've got to start asking people, and it gets real racist really quick.
The voting pattern of someone who immigrated from Cuba is
Mhm.
going to be different from someone who immigrated from Guatemala. Like, and even though there's even though someone who's MAGA might not realize those are two very different places with different cultures, like those are two different
Let's
populations.
put it this way: you're gonna have different voting habits between people moving in from Mexico versus people voting in from Canada. If you have a snowbird Canadian flying down who basically gets who essentially immigrates to Florida when they retire, you're dealing with an old white rich person. They're just from Canada. They're probably voting Republican.
Yeah.
There's a decent chance. There's a lot of wacky Canadians out there too. I don't know. So you think that the real answer is a universal basic income, because a universal basic income would free people up to have the conversation in the first place and to give them the time and space to be able to like go out and get their IDs and to spend time educating themselves, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
A universal basic income would probably alleviate the vast majority of the problems we're talking about, because then it wouldn't be a barrier to a lot of people.
Right.
If they had that cushion, they're not constantly riding on the rim of poverty, then it may not be a big deal for them to take a day and go to the DMV and get their driver's license, you know?
Yeah. No, I think
this
you made
isn't
a really
hypothetical. We've done universal basic income. We've even done it in this country during COVID, and it was awesome, you know?
Yeah, everybody liked it.
Yeah.
Everybody liked that part.
Everybody except the rich, so therefore we won't do it.
Sure. Did they even notice? The poors. They have time. They're gonna notice.
Exactly.
All right, well, we're going to end on that. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Stick around. I'm going to hit the little thing, and we're going to go into our Q&A section. Are you ready?
Let's do it.